Hello folks, and welcome back to the last part of our notes on the nervous system, Objective 5 or Part 5 on reflexes and the spinal cord. The spinal cord is an approximately 17-inch extension of the brainstem, basically. Looks a lot like the medulla oblongata. Obviously, it's going to be longer in taller people and shorter in short people, but it's approximately 17 inches. It extends all the way from the foramen magnum down to the first or second lumbar vertebrae. Beyond that point, it no longer has that cohesive structure of the spinal column. It breaks into tightly packed spinal nerves. And because of that, that's generally where they'll go and do a spinal tap, or they'll put that giant needle into your back to try to extract some cerebrospinal fluid so they can test it to see if you have an infection or things like that. The cerebrospinal fluid should be clear and colorless. If it's got a color to it or it's cloudy, something's wrong in your nervous system. Okay. And it's about as big around as your thumb. For the average person, it's about as big around as your thumb. So here we can see the spinal cord coming out of the brain right here. You can see the color difference right there. That's where it turns into spinal cord. Comes down, you can see all the spinal nerves coming off and branching and going to the different areas of the body. And when you get down into here, you can start to tell, it's hard to see in this picture, but it's turning into those tightly packed spinal nerves as opposed to the cohesive spinal cord. Here we can see vertebrae here. The disc could sit right here. Spinal cord going through. Now you can see the inside of the spinal cord is the gray matter. That's where the decision-making aspects of the spinal cord take place, is in this gray matter in the middle. The white matter is on the outside, and that's what's going to be transmitting signals up to the brain or down to the muscles and glands. It's kind of the reverse of in the brain, right? In the brain, the gray matter was mainly on the outside, and the white matter is on the inside. We reverse it here in the spinal column. Then we can see we've got all these spinal nerves coming out. They get bundled together to get through out the side here of the vertebrae and come out as nerve bundles heading off to their various areas. Interesting thing, guys, that would like to show something called referred pain. Sometimes these nerve bundles and these nerves are kind of sharing pathways up to the brain, and you can get something called referred pain. So you know how if somebody's having a heart attack, they often talk about pain down their left shoulder, left chest, and down their left arm. Well, actually, if you take a look at this picture in blue here, it's down the left arm and the left pinky, kind of this part of it. And that is referred pain. You're not feeling your heart hurt, but that signal that something's wrong there, your brain's interpreting it as pain here. Lungs and diaphragm, right here. Gallbladder, over here. Liver, right here. So sometimes it's near where the things are, and sometimes it's not. It's kind of an interesting thing, the way these nerves work, especially for these internal organs. Now on to reflexes. A reflex is simply a rapid, predictable motor response to a particular stimulus. So I poke you in the eye, your eyelids close. Rapid and predictable. Okay? So they may be inborn or intrinsic, things that you're born with, and it's just part of being a human, having a human body, or they can be learned. You can actually learn reflexes. They may involve only the peripheral nerves in the spinal cord, or involve higher brain centers as well. So, for instance, an inborn or intrinsic one would be like, you catch your toe on the sidewalk when you're walking along, and your body is going to try to, you're walking along, you catch your toe on a crack, and it pulls your leg back. Your body's going to try to bring this leg forward and try to catch your fall. You're going to kick that leg forward and try to catch the fall. That would be an inborn one. An acquired one might be like some of you folks who have played basketball for a long time. When you're young and you're dribbling the basketball, you'd have to kind of look at it as you're bouncing it, trying to get your hand in the right spot all the time. But the more and more you practice, the more bouncing that basketball and just kind of hitting fingers and pushing it down, that almost becomes a reflex. You can walk around, do everything else. You've got what your coaches may call muscle memory, right? You've ingrained those reflexes specific to how to move that basketball. So it's automatic, it's predictable, it's repeatable. And that's why your coaches kind of drill into you to practice how you want to play. It's one thing to know the correct form. It's another thing to practice it day after day after day, so you develop that motor memory for the correct form on doing whatever it is you do, because you're actually developing a reflex for that. Typing's another one where you kind of get that as well. That's an acquired or learned reflex. Let's see. All right. 5 components to a reflex arc. And these 5 components may look familiar to you from earlier in this year and a few other systems. Let's see if you pick up on it. First, you got the receptor. That's the site of the stimulus, the nerve ending. So you put your hand on a hot stove, right? That nerve ending on the end that's going to pick up that heat is the receptor. You have the sensory neuron, which transmits the afferent impulse to the central nervous system, sends that information up to your spinal cord or your brain, depending on what's going to control this particular reflex. The integration center, that's the gray matter in your spinal cord or your brain. It's going to decide if you need to respond or not. The motor neuron, that is the nerve going to the muscle or gland that's going to form the response. And then the effector is the muscle or gland that's going to do the response. What does this look like, guys? Exactly. It looks like a negative feedback loop, right? With the receptor, afferent pathway, control center, efferent pathway, effector, it's the same thing. A reflex is just a negative feedback loop of the motor system, right? It's a negative feedback loop to respond quickly to changes. Right? Say like that, putting your hand on the hot burner on the stove, right? You put it on there, you want to pull it off right away. If you put it on there and it has to go all the way up to your brain to process it, right? You put it on there, the receptor picks it up, sends it down the nerve, up the spinal cord, up to your brain, somatic sensory area, say, hey, that's hot. Oh no, we should move it, send it back to the motor cortex. Yeah, let's move it, send it back to the cerebellum. This is how you're going to move it, send it back to the motor cortex. All right, let's move it, then send it down to pull to your bicep to contract and move it. That doesn't take very long, but it's long enough to cause you more damage, okay, to decrease your chance of surviving. So as animals have evolved, they've evolved reflexes or short circuit or short pathways to get this to happen. So you touch that hot stove, sends it to your spinal cord, and if it's a strong enough signal on heat, it'll trigger the reflex. It's still going to send the information up to your brain so you know what's going on, but it's going to trigger that reflex so you start pulling away before you consciously even realize it's hot. And by the time you start pulling away and your brain realizes it's hot, it can continue that motion so you can go running under cold water or something like that. So let's see what the wiring of this looks like. So here we got a simple one. We've got the receptor, the pain receptor here, the sensory neuron carrying it to the spinal cord. The integration center is this green neuron, the interneuron here in the spinal cord in the gray matter. If the pain signal is strong enough, now if it's just a slight pain signal, it's not going to cause a reflex. It's not something inherently dangerous to you. So that signal is just going to, it's going to be connected to another neuron here, probably going to be a branch that's going to go up to the brain to let you know what you're feeling. But there's also a branch that comes to this interneuron. And if the signal is strong enough in this interneuron, if the graded potential is strong enough to trigger an action potential in the interneuron, that interneuron will fire and send one down the motor neuron to the effector for that muscle to pull away from that sharp pain. So it's a basic reflex arc. Okay, 3 neurons, and it has to do with graded potential and action potential, right? If the graded potential coming into this interneuron is too short, too small, it's not going to trip an action potential in this interneuron, and you won't send a signal down here to pull away. You'll just feel pain, but it's not bad enough that you needed to have a reflex to pull away. If that signal coming in is strong enough, it'll trigger an action potential, which will pull that muscle away. Now, like I said, there's probably another axon terminal here going to a nerve that's going to go to the brain, to the somatic sensory area. So that's going to get triggered no matter what anyway. So you'll feel the pain, but this is what's going to start that motion. You don't have to wait for the signal to go all the way up, do all that processing, and then come all the way back down. It's just bang, 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 and you're there. 2 synapses, and you're done. Here's just another view of the same thing. Let's take a closer look at this one, guys. So I'm going to zoom in on some different parts. So this is the classic patellar reflex here. You hit the patellar ligament with the hammer, right? So what's going on? You hit that with the hammer, and your leg's going to kick. What's happening when you hit that patellar tendon right there, it's actually pulling on this muscle, right? It's stretching it. There's a little stretch receptor in there. It's going to pull on it. Okay? So it pulls on that muscle, and so your body, negative feedback, right? It's going to want to work against the change. So if it's the muscle's getting pulled, you're going to want to contract it. All right, trying to get that foot back to where it belongs. This is what happens when you're walking along, and say you catch your toe on the concrete on the sidewalk. It causes your leg to bend, stretches that muscle quickly, and your reflex is to try to kick it out and get your leg back where it's supposed to go. So that's what's going on here. So we have that stretch receptor, afferent pathway coming up. And now here we see we need something a little more complicated, though, for this motion. It comes in and it branches. Two termini now. There's probably also one that's going up the brain to let you know what's going on. We got these two termini here in the reflex arc. This one is connected directly here, and that's going to go to some motor units, which are going to cause this muscle to contract, to kick up. But at the same time, remember, all your muscles have antagonists. Every prime mover has an antagonist. So we need to, for this hamstrings here, we've got to turn them off, keep them from contracting, right? Because until your brain's processed all this up here, it might be thinking it's time to bring the leg back to take the next step. And if it sends a signal down here for this to contract, when your reflex is trying to get that to contract, your leg's just going to get stuck and you're going to fall on your face. So we have to block this signal. So here we got an interneuron. We got a positive signal here, and if it's strong enough to trip this interneuron will fire, and it will actually block signal from going down this motor unit so that this cannot fire. It'll block a signal. Even if it's getting a signal from up above in the brain, this is going to block it, and so we can get that motion. So we got some interneurons will turn things on, others will block to keep things from turning on. Because remember, it's all binary, right? It's either on or off. So you're on or you're blocking so that it can't get turned on by accident. That's what's going on there. The flexor and crossed extensor reflex. This is like the touching the hot stove one, right? The stimulant side is withdrawn, and the contralateral side can be extended. For this one, for the crossed extensor reflex, let's show this one. This is if you're walking down the street and somebody grabs your arm and pulls on it, like they're trying to steal your purse or mug you or something like that, right? Out of the blue, you're not expecting it. They grab it and they pull. Okay. What is your response? Well, you want to bring that, you want to counteract it, right? Negative feedback. You want to bring it back in. Okay. And the other part of that is you try to push away whatever's pulling on you, right? That's kind of a basic animal response. That's a reflex response. And, if you're taking karate, you may have noticed that as a move. They take that initial get it going to get this thing started. It doesn't take long for your brain to get the signal and decide, oh yeah, we want to do something more than just this reaction, right? And so you'll pull this in, and then maybe you'll punch or you'll do a strike. So you take that initial reflex and you just continue it under conscious control after it gets started, but you've already started it rapidly, and then you continue it. And with all the training they do in karate, they can get that whole reflex to kind of go all the way if they train well enough. So let's see how this works. This one's a more complicated one, right? We got that stretch receptor coming in on the afferent fiber. And here, look at this series of interneurons here with positive and negatives. Come down here, this one, it'll cause the bicep to contract, and the tricep, it'll turn off so you can't accidentally kind of counteract that. And over here, we got the same kind of thing to get it to go the other direction. So this is all our decision-making process is, guys. It's kind of summarized in a reflex arc, but all our decisions are basically like this. You either have a strong enough signal coming in, a graded signal to cause an action potential, or you don't. If it's strong enough, you send on to the next decision tree. And if it's not strong enough, it just stops. If it's strong enough, it goes on to the next decision tree. These are kind of like these decision trees, right? These branching neurons, sending signal to other neurons or muscles or things like that. So that is basically how the nervous system works. There's some other reflexes here. I'll put a video up on this one as well. Babinski sign, if you get an abnormal plantar reflex, instead of, when you go to the bottom of your foot, you kind of look like that. If you kind of go, kind of crooked out, you dorsiflex, and that's a sign that something is probably not connected right in your nervous system. And that's why they check these nervous system reflexes, is if they are predictable and they work the way they're supposed to, probably good. If, on the other hand, they're not responding the way they're supposed to. There's something wrong somewhere in that nervous system arc that's going on. And that will do it for our notes on the nervous system, guys. I will see you later in class. Have a good day.